Thank you, John. And thank you, Sunday Forum Committee, for all of the forums that you put together. This is a great joy to be here, and I am honored to be here with my friend and artistic partner, Ashawnti. So I have lots of opportunities to talk at Plymouth, so I'm not going to talk a lot about myself. I feel as if you have questions, you can ask them. But a reminder, I am at Plymouth, I am the Minister for Spiritual Formation and Theater. And that title means two things. One is that I oversee the operations of the Con Theater, and the other is that I am the artistic director of Theater 45 Degrees. My background is in theater production and performance. I have a Master of Fine Arts from Florida Atlantic University in theater performance. And then I spent the last 20 years acting, directing, teaching, and producing. I have been an actor in many places around the country and in the Twin Cities. I have directed and taught a lot. And there was a time where I was the managing director of Torch Theater, a small but robust theater company in the Twin Cities, up until about 2012 when I moved to Chicago. Theater 45 Degrees is a program, a ministry of Plymouth. This is not a separate thing. This is not the way that we sometimes see Vocal Essence as being a very close partner, but not Plymouth, or the Food Shelf. It is a very close partner. We help start it, but it's not us. This is an attempt to have theater integrated into the life and work and mission and ministry of Plymouth Church in Minneapolis. This is not an attempt to create a separate thing, but rather how do we use this to achieve all of our visions and goals. And part of this comes from this church's continued and historical work in art, music, visual art, and theater. And even though theater has not been as present as some of those others, in 1968, when this congregation expanded their building, you built a theater. The Con Theater was built. Yeah, I don't know another church that has a 200-seat proscenium stage in their campus, but you do, we do. And so that means that somewhere in the thinking of what is important and what does the future of this place look like, theater, the act of embodied storytelling, the act of physical being on stage and communicating was part of that plan. And so what we are trying to do is continue that, to live into that, whatever that purpose was. I don't know why you built the Con in 1968, but this is part of that. So before we go further into what we're doing, Ashawnti, please tell us about you.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Ashawnti Sakina Ford. As John said, I'm the producing artistic director of Theater 45 Degrees. I'm a theater artist, so that's just an umbrella term for me. Under the umbrella of theater, I've directed, I've produced, I've acted, I've taught. There's a lot more. I've done props for a show once in my life. Yeah, I'm born and raised in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and the surrounding northwest suburbs. I'm currently with child, so that's exciting news in my life. I have a baby on the way, so I'm prepping to be a mama. Yeah. I am also the child of artists and activists. My mother, who is a spoken word artist, and my father, who produces and writes hip hop and rap, and both in their younger years have done a lot of activism around town, and really have shaped the way that I approach my work. I do a lot of work that has to do with social justice, a lot of work that uplifts brown and Black voices and brown and Black bodies. I work with youth a lot to teach these same kind of values and uplift their voice. And I've been, I want to say, working as an artist in the Twin Cities really since I've been like 13 years old when I got my first paycheck doing work at Intermedia Arts. So I yeah, I hold the city really dear to me, and I love the story that I have to tell for people about why I'm an artist here and what I do. So thank you. Mhm.
Thanks, Ashawnti. Ashawnti and I met when I was a younger person, like 3 years ago, and we were doing a theater play shop, and I hired Ashawnti to be one of our directors and teachers. And in that, we discovered that we had a lot in common and a lot of common visions. And from that, we developed this shared artistic concept of theater 45 degrees. So
Mhm.
I'm going to talk a little bit about what this whole thing means, theater 45 degrees. So first, the name. The name came from a friend of mine named Alex Brooks, who was brainstorming names with me when a few years ago we had the opportunity to do a play reading that I'll talk about in a moment. And we needed to come up with something quickly. And this is what theater 45 degrees is: two things, really. One is Minneapolis is on the 45th parallel, so it just gives us location. And the other thing is that if you think about a grid, I don't know if this works, and when two things, ideas, concepts meet, they create a 90-degree angle. It is at 45 degrees where there is that compromise, that encounter, that place of meeting, that place of where sharing and shared ideas can be found with some reciprocity. So that is the root of the name Theater 45 Degrees. Since it is rooted at a church, there's a little theology behind this, and I'm going to talk about this briefly. So the idea is that theater at Plymouth can be an important and necessary piece of our overall ministry and our overall work. The hope is that theater will continue to expand the ways that we use our God-given creativity as a means of self-reflection and meaning-making. A scholar of theater and religion named Nelvin Voss says, "Both religion and drama prompt us to see within, for both may initiate a struggle within the depths of one's being, which has always been characterized as a quest for meaning." As we continue to deepen our spiritual lives and practices, theater is another means of learning about those we are commanded to love, both ourselves and the others, our neighbors. For members of Plymouth, this is an opportunity to grow in our community and broaden our theological vision. Nelvin Voss again says, "Every performance can be seen as an act of resurrection. The inert words are reincarnated by the living presence of actors and members of the audience. And having a robust and quality theater program can bring new people into Plymouth that may not otherwise enter a church. And we found this already. There are many people who've come to see some of our readings or performances that have said, I don't ever come into a church, but I came here because I trusted X. And whether they return for a traditional Sunday worship is less important than an ability to act in reconciliation with people for whom church may be painful, foreign, or a historically judgmental space. The people in the stories portrayed in our performances should not be exclusively look like the people at Plymouth. This is an opportunity to not only examine ourselves and our conceptions of God through the familiar, but also through the many lenses that others may encounter themselves and the holy. The lives and stories of people from all or no backgrounds or faiths can be meaningful and profound. And this practice of theater making can be differentiated from other theaters in the area that operate in more secular frameworks. And this we've been practicing by an intentional reintroduction of ritual to the experience. For example, the audience and the performers may participate in something together before and after the performance in order to bind, to begin to share the storytelling and the story receiving. And this could be silence or a small meal that reflects Christian communion or Muslim iftar. The theater at Plymouth should and will continue to work to retain the sacredness of the stories that are being experienced. The Word is becoming flesh, and that is a holy moment. We have determined, modeling after the purposes of Plymouth Church, we have the purposes of Theater 45 Degrees, and they are this. We use the theatrical experience to deepen the many facets of being human in the following ways. Through the inner, stories that engage the spiritual side of the human person, regardless of, but not ignoring, religious experience. These stories are rooted in questions and not answers. In the communal, as a community of storytellers and story receivers, we strive to give an experience of collaboration, intersectionality, and valuing and honoring the many voices that too often get pushed to the margins. And finally, encountering the other. We will present stories that are meant to nurture transformation and deepen how we navigate our encounters with those that we may consider to be others. That is the intention and the purposes of Theater 45 Degrees. So those are all words, those are all ideas. What have we done? That's always the question. What have you done? Theater 45 Degrees started really in a moment of opportunity. A playwright named Lauren Gunderson, who recently was named the most produced playwright in the country. She wrote a play called Natural Shocks that was, the intention was to have a national reading of this same play on the 1-year anniversary of the Parkland school shootings in Florida. And we, out of just luck and coincidence, became the Minneapolis reading. We were the only reading of this play in Minneapolis. And we did a reading in Guild Hall. You can see here, I think you can see here. You can see here just a fairly blurry image of what it looked like. We had 3 actors of 3 different backgrounds playing this one character. And then we continued. We did a series in the fall of 2019, which seems impossibly long ago at this point, called Step Back, Listen Up, Stories We All Need to Hear. And in that, every other Monday night for 3 months, we had a performance in our chapel. And we purposely chose the chapel so as to play with the idea that these stories hold sacredness, that they are holy just unto themselves. It's also a really lovely, intimate place to hear people tell stories. And we started off with Blackout Improv, of which Ashawnti was one of the performers. And one of the members of Blackout interviewed his mother, who had emigrated here from
Eritrea.
Thank you, Eritrea. And he would ask her questions and she'd tell stories. And then the other members of the improv would improv off of those stories. And so it was this back and forth between somebody telling their authentic story and then a playful improv off of it. Then we met with the Irreducible Grace Foundation, which is out of St. Paul, which uses theater as an art of healing by way of doing and presenting theater with youth that would otherwise not have a voice. Then we had Interact Center for the Arts, which is adults with different types of disabilities, and they performed a lovely various like songs and skits, and it was, all of this was very joyful. Then it was followed by the Alliance of Latinx Minnesota Artists, also called ALMA, by a solo performance of a woman's immigration story. And then Washburn High School's Black Box Theater gave us perspective of youth and youth of color about what is important to them and what they need us to hear. And then finally, we ended with Zamia Theater, which is housed at Plymouth Church, and they are a theater of people who are currently or who have experienced houselessness or housing, questionable housing, telling their story from their point of view. And so all of this again happened in the chapel. And then finally, the last thing we did before the pandemic hit was Mara, a reading of a new play called Mara, Queen of the World. And Ashawnti produced this. So Ashawnti, if you could talk about this a little bit and then go into what we're working on now.
Yeah, for sure. Mara, Queen of the World was written by playwright Rebecca Nicholson, who has a MFA in playwriting from Columbia, New York. And I forget if she approached me or if I approached her about this play that is kind of both futuristic and also ancient. It's about, without giving too much away, but it's about a Black woman who was enslaved in the past and has to come into contact with a wizard and a hummingbird and decipher a story that's going to, I forget what the story does, but it's very futuristic and it's also very ancient. I really love it. But we had some actors from the city, Black actors from the city, who read this. It wasn't in the chapel, it was in another room in Plymouth that's much larger.
It was in Guildhall.
In Guildhall, yeah. And we had it was just it was a nice reading that I think I was happy to have done right before things started, not allowing us to be together.
And a small piece of this, that everything that we do, we pay. Mm-hmm. We compensate artists, and all of the artists in our readings are professional theater artists, are professional actors. And all of the Step Back, Listen Up series, we paid the groups to do their work. One of the foundational pieces of Theater 45 Degrees is we never expect an artist to give us their work for free. Their work is sacred and we need to compensate them for it. Mm-hmm. And especially actors from communities that are often underestimated and forgotten about, they are often asked to give their heart and artistic ability for free. Mm-hmm. As if just being invited to the table is enough of payment. And so we really push against that. And we will always try to pay better than anybody else for whatever we're doing, or at least as good as. Mm-hmm. We can never have the coffers of the Guthrie and never pay that kind of weekly rate, but we pay for a reading much more than anybody else does because people's time is worth it. Mm-hmm. And then one last thing is, if you are not aware of what a play reading is and haven't seen one before, play reading is a chance for the play to be read by actors without any of the other materials. Mm-hmm. There is no set, there's often no sound. There's just somebody reading stage directions and the actors acting. And they're often reading it on a, as you saw from the picture of Natural Shocks, people are standing at music stands and reading. And it's an incredibly intimate and authentic way of hearing a story. Mm-hmm. So Ashawnti, what are we working on now?
Yeah, so we're currently working with playwrights right now who have been commissioned by us to write a play that is inspired by this book, if you can see it, My Grandmother's Hands by Resmaa Menakem. And if you haven't heard of this book, I highly recommend it. It's basically like I don't want to call it a self-help. Oh, it says it on the back. It's the first self-help book to examine white body supremacy in America from the perspective of trauma and body-centered psychology. So it's really, it's a book that's about racialized trauma and the I would say white supremacy-based racialized trauma in the Black-bodied American and the white-bodied American, and also in the police-bodied American, and how we can physically undo some of the trauma that we've held on to for generations. And when I say generations, I mean long before slavery was a thing in the Americas. I'm talking, back into the Middle Ages. It's a really profound and deep book that can be hard to read through. It can be hard. So what I've decided, I had this idea to just kind of read this book, and have playwrights write plays that were about healing. And the reason why that's so important to me is because what I've been noticing about Black American theater and the theater canon and Black American theater that gets produced at, I'll say, majority white theaters or white-centered theaters, the plays that are getting produced have really been re-traumatizing, not only for the artists who are on stage who have to go through trauma every night to tell a story about racism, to tell a story about slavery, to tell a story about civil rights in front of white eyes, but also re-traumatizing to maybe the 5 Black audience members, as if we know about the statistics of theater and who's going to see theater, re-traumatizing for those audience members who sit through that and walk away with, my question is like, what are they walking away with, other than the fact that they got to re-witness the trauma that I'm sure they've grown up to know their whole lives. And so the idea I've had with this book is to have playwrights read and write plays that can target and center healing more so for the Black bodies who would be, there are 3 Black playwrights, by the way, but healing for the Black bodies who would be acting in the plays and healing for the Black bodies that would be witnessing these plays. Yeah, I don't know if I'm forgetting anything. It's, yeah, that, I don't know. Is there more questions for that, Seth? Because I don't know if I'm forgetting anything with this.
I just put a link in the chat. So I put 2 links in the chat. One is about an article that was written in the Southwest Journal about something we did 2 falls ago. But I just put something in that one is Theater 45's website, so you can go look at it. Mm-hmm. And 2, that specifically talks about the 3 playwrights. So you can learn more about them. And it's very, I think that we all benefit from hearing what Ashawnti just told us. It's something that when she and I had a conversation in my backyard, it really stuck with me and it really resonated. This idea that to authentically portray a character in a play about trauma, an actor has to relive that trauma in some way. And when we have plays that that do that on a regular basis for audiences that don't, then the actors don't feel that the audience necessarily then changes or encounters it in the same way or takes that trauma and then goes and does something with it, that can be really there can be a lot of loss to that. So what we're trying to do, and this is what another part of going forward is, we're trying to talk about a hoped for future, about healing, about how is it that theater can participate in the storytelling. It doesn't have to ignore the traumas or histories or things, but in the telling of those, how does it result in a place of healing? And Resmaa Menakem talks about healing is on a continuum. You are never completely broken and you are never completely healed. So when we talk about healing, we do not mean solving, but we do mean that it is approaching the intention is for healing and reintegration and wholeness, as opposed to just the telling of brokenness over and over again. And so is that helpful, Ashawnti? Yeah,
thank you. And I also just want to mention, the playwrights who agreed to take part in this. I just thank them so much, because what I've been noticing in our meetings is that in the reading of this book, for the purposes of producing the play, they are themselves, having to, and currently with how our state is, how our city is right now, they are currently having to go through, I don't want to say re-traumatizing themselves, but going through facing their trauma and working through their own trauma in order to be able to write the healing plays that we hope to come from this. So it is really hard work. It's not just like reading a book and then writing like, oh, this is kind of what I learned from it. It's like facing your own trauma and going through that body work yourself to produce a play that can reinforce healing for those taking part in the telling of it and those taking part in the witnessing of it.
Yeah, it's a powerful and profound set of works.
Mm-hmm.
And so with that, where we're going, so there's a lot of unknowns, as we all know, right? About what can be done in our very near future. We are operating right now under the assumption that by the fall, we will be able to have at least some sort of in-person storytelling. And so we're planning on really two major things. One is a series of play readings, potentially one a month. And these would be either in the chapel or in Guild Hall. And we would be partnering with directors and playwrights and other artistic communities, again, to help provide another venue for them to tell the stories that they need to hear. But the goal of this will be on a hoped for future. So often when we talk about the future in our current American context, all we can see is dystopia and collapse. And that, while might be fun sometimes, it is our belief that the stories we tell now shape our future, that our imagination is shaped by the stories we tell. And if we only tell the stories of a certain direction of our future, we won't have an imagination to do anything else. So if we help expand our imagination and tell stories about a hoped for future, about how things can be taken and healed, regenerated, restored, then maybe we will find new ways to actually live into that and do it. And so we'll be doing a series of play readings on that. And again, paying all of our artists to do that. And then once these plays, rooted in my grandmother's hands, are done, then we will be producing them. They will go through a workshop phase. And that just means we have actors read it so the playwright can hear it and start to make changes. And maybe those are public and maybe they're not. And then eventually they will be fully produced productions. We don't have a timeline on that because we are letting the playwrights operate on their own timeline pretty much. And so a lot of this is rooted in, there's two big things facing our future. One is the pandemic. We don't know when we can do this, but like I said, we're hopeful that this fall enough people will be vaccinated that we can reach herd immunity and gather together again. But the other thing is money. And I know we love to talk about money, but it's true. In the past, Theater 45 is funded by Plymouth. And it was a purposeful choice in conversations with the deacons and other leadership that this is not something that we go seeking outside money to fund, but rather something that Plymouth should own. And in the past, we have a $5,000 budget. And we have done really amazing things with a $5,000 budget and then a little bit of extra money that we were able to find. In this budget coming up, we have requested a fairly substantial increase to a $50,000 budget so that we can live into and realize what we are asking. And that might seem like a very large increase, but for a theater, $50,000 is still a sort of shoestring budget to do. But we have a lot of things working for us. Our facility is already ours. We have all of the overhead built in, and you are already paying for me. And then all we do is pay Ashawnti and the other artists to do what we are asking them to do. Our budget this year is not a ambitious and a visionary budget, except for this piece is my memory of. I'm not as involved in the budget as other people, but this is the biggest increase of a program of anything there. So all this is dependent on what happens there. So with that, Ashawnti, did we forget anything? I'm looking at my notes and
I don't think so.
well, we'll find out when people ask questions.
Yeah.
What do you want to know?
Okay, I have a question here, Seth, and I want to add on to it. The question Karen Barset asks, will Theater 45 Degrees be doing more work with Theater Play Shop? I add on to that question is, you talked about the Con Theater, but in all the readings and the performances that have been done so far, you have not used the Con Theater. Do you have a vision for using the Con Theater?
Those are great questions. Theater Play Shop is in, we haven't been able to do it the last summer or the year before or this summer. 2 years because of the pandemic and 1 because of lack of signups, I believe. I don't remember the reason why we had to cancel it 1 year. But Theater Play Shop is under the umbrella of Theater 45 Degrees at Plymouth. So this is our project to do. And we will not be able to do it this summer, but we will return the following summer. And Theater Play Shop will therefore look different. Play Shop was never really a program of Plymouth. It was something that we invited somebody to do at Plymouth, and it became integrated in, but it was never like Plymouth staff really never ran it. So we're going to try to bring that into the mission of Theater 45 Degrees next year. And it might look different. It might not just be youth. We might find other ways to get the whole community together for this. The other question is about the con. So when I mentioned at the beginning, my title and theater involves 2 different things. The Con Theater as a public performance space, a rental space, a source of income, and a source of community connection. We haven't performed in there because we have not wanted to take that space away from the ability for other groups to use it. Now, it doesn't mean we won't use it in the future. Our belief is that the Grandmother's Hands production will happen in the con. But a reading does not have to happen in that space, and that allows it to be used by somebody else.
Okay. So I'd like to encourage people to ask further questions. I have one more I can throw in here, and that is, I understand that we house Zamia Theater offices at Plymouth. Will there be any productions put on by Zamia at Plymouth, or do they have their own space?
I don't believe they have their own space. They use ours. The Board of Outreach gave them an office to use in our office area. I don't know what to call it. And they use rooms for rehearsal spaces. They have not used the con yet, I don't think, but they are welcome to. So I don't know. They're in the same position as all theaters, ambitiously hopeful, but it's unknown. I have a question for Ashawnti. Until other questions do or do not come in. What can you talk a little bit more about your experience in your conversations with the playwrights on trying to reading a section of the book together or separately, coming together to talk about it, and how that pivots into a play? Like that, there can sometimes feel like a pretty large gap between. Many people here do book readings and discussions. How do you then turn that into a piece of theater?
What I've been encouraging the playwrights to do is really just think about the healing practices of the book. It's not necessarily like take a story from this book and write a play, because there are some stories in the book as well, and it's not necessarily writing a play based on a story you hear in the book. But when you think about, I constantly encourage them, like when you think about the plays that we've seen in the Black American theater canon, and what the result of performing and seeing those plays have been, like, what do you want to see differently? And looking at some of the healing practices, so like the breathing techniques, the moving techniques, and a lot of them have expressed interest in, there's 3, but all of them have expressed interest in, taking some of those practices and incorporating them into the play, where we might have the audience and the actors practicing a breath technique together during the performance. The readings have been on our own, and I've had my own timeline to read it. The book suggests that you take your time with it. Like the author states, like, don't move forward unless you do these exercises. I don't listen to that. I just kind of plow through and read. But the playwrights are, you know, encouraged to do what I do or to take their own time with it. And they've been finding when I've come to meet with them, I'll say, like, I'm on chapter 13, and they're like, I couldn't get past 5, Ashawnti, because this is so hard. And I'm like, I understand, so they're really taking their time with the book, taking their time with the reading, and taking their time with the healing practices that the book offers, which I find incredible, because that's going to inform their plays a lot more than just reading through and coming in with bullet points. Like, I like this section, which is what I'm doing, but I'm not writing a play, so I understand their perspective. But thanks. yeah, thank you.
We have a raft of questions all of a sudden here.
All right.
Let's start out with a question from Tom Anderson. I think it's great we support Theater 45 Degrees as a congregation. What kind of support would you like or need from us as individuals?
Ooh. Well, simply put, when we do something, show up. When we did the Step Back, Listen Up series, each of those performances in the chapel could hold about 100 people, and each of them was sold out. So between 90 and 110 people came to each of those performances, the majority of which were not Plymouth members, was not the Plymouth community. Now, there were many people from Plymouth who did come, but the majority of those audiences were from the outside. And like I said before, we're people who don't come to Plymouth or don't come inside churches, or but they came because they trusted Ashawnti, or they trusted one of the performers, or they were there to see somebody perform in our space. And so it was often, depending on the show, it was often even something you don't see at Plymouth very often, where it was a majority non-white audience, and that was really important for what we do. So show up and support it, and talk to us to know how is it landing, what's missing. We are going to. The intention is also to do some things where the community performs and we do some work. Participate in that. You don't have to be an actor to have a voice.
A question from Ann Manning. This is such a wonderful opportunity for Plymouth and the wider community. How might we help Theater 45 Degrees get the word out about this, especially outreach beyond Plymouth?
Isn't that always the struggle? in a world full of noise, how do you get heard? People show up to things because they trust somebody who tells them about it. They might show up because they're interested. They might like the content. They might know Ashawnti and say, oh, she's performing. This is Blackout Improv. I'll just go see them do anything. But most of the time, if Anne says, I'm going to this, who wants to come with me? People will go to it. Or set up a discussion about it afterwards. And I will help you. You see something that we do, I'll help you find a space or a mode for you to then have a discussion about it, so that it's not just a moment of storytelling, but that story lives on. Elie Wiesel has what I think is a very powerful quote, is to hear a witness is to become a witness. So when you go to these shows and these readings and these stories and you hear it, you are now a witness to it. You now are an accomplice in how to tell this and how to live this and how to not let this go.
We have many more questions. So now,
right.
And now I'm going to give you the hardest question that we have in the list. So try to be succinct in your response to this, even though the question makes that impossible. Would you both please talk about ministry and its meaning for theater?
Yeah. Ashawnti, do you want me to start, or do you want to go? Yeah.
You can start.
Okay. Ministry is an act of encounter. it is an act of listening, and it is active telling a story. And so I see theater and religion. The quotes I had from Nelvin Voss and the thing I said earlier, I think are incredibly true, that theater and religion came from the same human sort of impulse to gather together, to tell story, and to make meaning out of it, and to have some sort of ritualized action. We think of church as being ritualized, but theater is as well. If you've ever gone to a play, there's a ritual to it. It's unspoken. You sit down, you talk, there's a thing, there's excitement, then you stop. There's an announcement, there's the beginning, there is a certain form to it, as is ministry. And it's about encounter, listening deeply, letting it affect you, and telling the story. Is that succinct enough?
Excellent.
I'm just going to say ditto.
Very succinct. Okay, thank you. Let's see. Approximately how many readers and actors have benefited from payment for their work within our theater program?
Well, 3 were natural shocks. There were 10. Mara had an all Black cast, Black director, Black playwright, Black producer. It was completely run and owned by Black experience. That was 15 people probably in total. And then in the Step Back, Listen Up series, it's probably 50 performers. So 6 organizations that we paid, and I don't know how they necessarily compensated their artists, but there's been about 50 to 75 performers total.
Okay. All right, thank you. Hazel Lutz wants to know what you hope to do for people with hearing or other conditions which make going to theater difficult.
Yeah, Hazel and I have talked about this before. Thank you for bringing it back up. The chapel is a wonderful, intimate space, but sometimes it is hard to hear. It is made for music to be resonant, but sometimes voices get muddy in there. We have begun to play with how to use the audio system in there, which is not great, but it can be improved, or we find other spaces that just work better. Guildhall is better for that, and the PA system just fits that space a little bit better. The theater can use, when we're in the con, people can be mic'd in a different way. So yeah, thank you for bringing that back up, Hazel. I know we've talked about this before, and it is something important to keep in mind.
Okay. Is Theater 45 described on Plymouth's website with a link to its website?
No, not yet. Partially because we've been doing so much work to make our website more usable for our current circumstances, and because Theater 45 has not been doing anything to promote or show, but so not yet, but it will be.
I believe in the chat link that Seth put out there to the Theater 45 webpage, there's more information about the 3 playwrights who were involved in transforming pieces of My Grandmother's Hands. So I'm going to refer the person who asked that question to that link in the chat. And then the final question, and you guys have 1 minute to answer this one. What is the hope and future of Theater 45?
Go for it.
Well, I was just going to say to keep going and to not be a thing. So, you know, I hope for it to just be, you know, something that the Minneapolis and the theater community, the whatever other communities, like, you know, that it's just like a really significant part of how we do storytelling here in Minneapolis. So that's what I think.
To go with that, the future is to build more trust in 2 communities that are often not at odds, but I think people think they're at odds: the theater and religious communities. There's a lot of trust that needs to be built as Plymouth to theater communities to say that we are not. I get people who say, how can you have a theater there? How would you ever be able to say anything without being censored? And we're not. We have an independent board of artists that help us, and the Board of Spiritual Formation is our internal board. we're not censored. We have our own artistic vision. So it's building trust there, but it's also building trust more in terms of the Plymouth community as well, where theater can be seen as a valid and spiritual exercise, and not that it can't also be a form of entertainment and release and learning, but all of that is a spiritual practice. So a lot of building trust that needs to be done.
Great. So we are now at the point in our program where you have to, Seth and Ashawnti, hear our thanks and hopefully the thunderous applause. You will have to imagine the thunderous applause, right, from everybody here in the audience. Thank you so much. A wide-ranging and interesting presentation this morning. So many, many thanks.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
So my last thing to cover this morning is to remind people of what's coming up next week. So next week we have Introducing Plymouth's Green Fund, presented in collaboration with the Climate and Environmental Justice Committee of the Board of Outreach. And our presenters will be Plymouth's Rick Neville, Fred Queersfeld, and David Homans. And this should be there's an article about it in the Flame if you want to get some pre-information about the new Green Fund, but otherwise, or in both cases, be sure and attend to learn much more about this exciting new program. So with that, thanks everybody. Appreciate everybody being here. Wonderful presentation, wonderful questions. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thanks, Ashawnti.
Thank you.